Professor J. Craig Wheeler. Craig, welcome. It's wonderful to meet you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to meet you, Richard. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. So thank you so much for joining me today. Let me just give a little bit of few words of background on you, and then I actually want to dive in with some big stuff because we've got a big conversation today. Craig is a Samuel T. and Fern Yanasgawala Regents Professor of Astronomy Emeritus and Distinguished Teaching Professor Emeritus at the University of Texas at Austin and past chair of the department. I'm going to pause there and then tell you a little bit about what Craig has written. A book's coming out very soon in November 2024 called The Path to Singularity: How Technology Will Challenge the Future of Humanity. And this book is an incisive summary of the evolution of humanity to its critical current stage and foresight into our technological future from the broad perspective of, yes, an astrophysicist. And we are developing computers that are more than capable of we are. We are peering into our own brains, says the blurb. We have the capacity to direct our own biological evolution. We are altering the ecological balance of our environment, and we're venturing into space. What happens next is we race towards a technological explosion, and that's what the book covers. So you've been busy, haven't you, Greg?
Yeah.
Let me ask you, humans are driving our species and many others to extinction. What role could or should AI play in either saving us or stopping us?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've thought as deeply as I should about what specific role AI has there. It's just, it is a concern and it is a technological one because it is kind of our technological ability to pollute the environment and change the thermodynamics of the atmosphere and the oceans. But if we define what the problems are, then it's certainly conceivable to me that you could put that problem to an AI and say, analyze all the aspects that you know about the Earth and the atmosphere and the oceans and people and industries and help us design a way of mitigating the problems and whatnot. So I think there probably is a role. I don't see it quite as keenly in my mind as I've thought through some other things. But a very valid question, Richard.
It strikes me, Craig, that for thousands of years, we've marked our own homework as a species. So we've considered the good of humans above all others. And we can talk a little about evolution as well, which will be fun. But should you ask a person on the street, are humans good or bad? They're likely to say good. Overarchingly, we're good. If you asked a whale if we were good or bad, if you could ask a whale, they'd probably say that we're not so good. I've
Yes.
wondered for a long time whether there's a lack of alternative intelligence on our planet that can challenge the human perceptions of what's right and what's wrong. Does AI offer us a path to that, do you think?
Yeah, well, we are the dominant intelligence on the planet. There's no question of that. We can make tools and do all sorts of things and accumulate our knowledge, write it down so future generations can benefit from the past knowledge, and that all builds on itself. That's part of the exponential growth of knowledge, is it accumulates like compound interest, not like a simple interest. And so that's just a fact of the matter, but it is also true, I think, that we've always kind of thought as nature as a thing to exploit. And now we're seeing in the context of climate change that there are limits to that. So one of the things that I speak to in this context is talking about Malthus. So Malthus noted that in a biological context, species will sometimes or even often uh, proliferate until they're using up all the resources, and then they die off, and then they will maybe build back up again. And there was a discussion back in the 60s that Paul Ehrlich at Stanford made popular, talking about the population bomb, that we were producing people so fast that we would use up resources. And that turned out not to play out then because there were special rices and greenery of various kinds that we found ways to feed a lot more people. So that particular crisis went away. but as I'm writing about this topic, I'm thinking, isn't climate change the next chapter in that? So yeah, we solved that food problem in the 60s, but now we're seeing that the environment is biting us even more. And I think one could, so Malthus is very denigrated in many quarters of people who don't think we have a population problem and don't want to worry about limiting our use of fossil fuels and whatnot. But I think the case can be made that we are still facing in climate change a classic Malthusian disaster. So I write about that a little bit in the book, and I expect to get some bite back on that because I know there are people that think Malthus is next to the devil somehow. So I'll throw that out as a controversial thought that I was happy to put down in black and white.
Yeah, the population question's been debated many times, and the limits
Oh,
of
it's got, yeah,
the
it's
world,
complicated.
and of course, in many
People,
countries, the
yeah, people
birth
are
rate
rightfully
is off a cliff.
worried.
It's so bad.
Yeah, people are rightfully worried that as populations decline, and there are some indications of that starting to happen, that that will be terrible for the economy. And I think that's true, but a question of how many people the earth can support in a healthy manner may require fewer people than we currently have. And if that's true, then somehow we have to think through with smart economists, how do we maintain an economy where people's quality of life is good and stays good and gets better without devastating the environment at the same time and having fewer people if that's what's required. And again, the idea that one can entertain the notion of having fewer people is anathema in many quarters. So I expect to get some feedback on that too.
Yeah, they're two interesting analogies. And it does strike me that our economy is predicated on growth regardless of
I,
population,
that
which
is a notion.
which is
I'm sorry.
doomed to fail, right? No, it's fine,
Yes,
but
you're
it
hitting
can't
my,
grow forever no matter what. So that at
yeah.
some point would have to
Well,
crash, wouldn't it?
that is a point that I make in the book that we're on a finite planet, a finite surface, and yeah, and this has bothered me sort of my whole life. While I'm not an expert in economics as well, but the premise that you must have growth to have a proper society and things getting better. And that's worked. I mean, we have had growth, and people by and large throughout the planet are much better off now than they were 100 years ago, 200 years ago. But as you just said, there are limits. It's a finite planet with finite resources, and we have to eventually face that. So I think the idea that our population would grow exponentially, just that won't work. And now that it's trying to curl over a little bit, there are people saying, "Oh my gosh, that's a disaster." And indeed, there are issues associated with that. So I touch a little bit on, well, if we fill this planet up, can we just go to Mars? And I think the answer is we could go to Mars and within 50 or 100 years, fill it up and overpollute it too. So I think the idea of going to Mars as a solution to climate change and population issues here on the planet, that's I think that's not right. I don't think that's the way to go.
Yeah, if we're going to use up this planet, we'd probably use up the next planet and so on and so
That's
forth.
that's the idea. And so space is very big. There's a lot of room to go out there, but I think to say, well, okay, we could just grow all we want forever. I'm a little more conservative than that, I guess.
I'm going to ask you about that in just a moment, but just before we move on from the point, I mean, obviously in nature, if there's too many foxes, there's not enough chickens to eat, and then they starve, and that rebalances the population. But interestingly, that's sort of every fox's responsibility, and their impact is almost the same across every fox. But of course, the pollution is just a few human beings, really. I mean, there's a few companies and a few humans that pollute huge amounts, and then massive population growth in some countries. But those people barely make any imprint on the world at all. But to your point, that actually doesn't make any difference. If climate change is going to significantly reduce our population, who caused the problem is academic. It's going to affect us all.
yeah, it's of course it has been the Western world, the developed world, that is mainly doing the causing the issues with climate change, and then it's people not in the developed world that are going to be suffering from it. It's a very complicated issue.
Yeah, which is mostly geographic, and had the geography been a different way around, it would have been a different set of humans that had got the opportunities to pollute, and it's just the way that
Yeah.
history went out.
Yeah, I
Um,
think we will, we in developed countries, the rate of growth of population does tend to level out as people get more successful. One of the most effective things to do is to educate women. And the next thing you know, you're not having as many babies as you did before. And I think that's a good thing. It's a natural kind of feedback. Looking at the way things are going right now, that's apt to happen more slowly in Africa. So I think we're going to have, it's not my ideas, things I've read about, uh, continued population explosion in Africa. And we as a global society, we're going to have to think about that. And that's not saying anything bad about Africans. It's just that's just the way the demographics are going. And um,
but
so
you perceive that we will top out and then start to rebalance at a
I think
certain number?
yeah, and it's going to go at different rates in different places and different times. So I don't think there's going to be a single clear answer to that. And
Mm.
I suspect problems are going to get more severe and more people will wake up to the issues and address them. And then I hope out of that will come some healthy solutions. Right now, it's a bit of a controversial mess, as so many things are.
And we'll talk about your role as an astronomer and what prompted you to write this book. But you did mention Mars there, and as part of your research and reflection on futurism, do you see a multiplanetary future for humans? Do you think that's
Ah,
realistic?
okay, well, yeah, I talked about that a little bit.
Mm.
One of the key questions, well, certainly multiplanetary. I have no doubt we're going to go to Mars. I think 1,000 years from now, there will be ancient cities on Mars. But we're just moving in that direction. We can talk a little bit about what the dynamics of that are because they're very interesting as well. Uh, Whether there are other habitable environments in our solar system is not clear. Maybe we build big space stations and all of that. Science fiction has speculated about that for a long time. We just launched the Europa Clipper, which is going to go out and fly around Europa and probe its oceans and see. It won't directly detect whether there's anything alive there, but that's what all the scientists are pursuing. They want to know, first you determine the ingredients, like we've determined, yes, there was water on Mars. Did life form there then? We don't know yet. Still working on that. But the Clipper is a great thing. So we will expand out and sort of fill the solar system at some level at a long enough time. The question of whether we ever go anywhere else is a big one, and it depends basically on the speed of light. Because with the physics we know right now, you can't fly faster than the speed of light. And relative to the sizes of our galaxy and the universe, that's rather small. And so if we can't develop physics that will allow us to push the hyperdrive button the way they do in Star Wars, and boo, off you go. If we don't develop that kind of physics, then we're probably restricted to our solar system for a very long time, would be my guess.
And do you believe that there is microbial life in our solar system?
Well, scientists are loath to use the word belief in this context, but so here's so I suppose the simple answer is yes. I will be surprised if we don't find microbial life elsewhere, but we have zero evidence for it now. And one has to follow the facts as you know them, and there's just no evidence for that now. But our technology is limited, and we're still trying to do a better job of that. And I think as we discover more exoplanets around other stars and we develop the techniques to study their atmospheres and see whether they're out of equilibrium that would indicate things exhaling into the atmosphere, that will come over the next, again, same kind of time frame, 10, 20 years, I think. But right now there is no evidence, but you see the same physics everywhere, you see the same chemistry everywhere, you see proto-life in meteorites. I think most astronomers expect that there is life, at least simple microbial life out there. But again, no evidence yet, so be careful.
And if we did find it in the icy waters there or the upper atmospheres of Venus or maybe even several places, then would it be fair to say, therefore, across the galaxy, life is common?
I I think that would be the natural extrapolation. It would be better to prove that in some way. But yeah, if you find out it is not just restricted to our planet, and on our planet, life finds a way to live wherever it can, all sorts of crazy niches, very salty, very acidic, frozen ice,
Mm.
in the depths of rocks, down in mines in South Africa that haven't seen sunlight in a million years. Life everywhere. And so the indication is that life is following Darwinian evolution of taking advantage of your environment and learning to exploit it, which is how we've gotten into the problem we have now. It's not just a human thing. It's the way life works. Uh, that probably it's everywhere. If we can show that it's anywhere besides the Earth, that would be a very natural thought to have. Again,
Yeah,
more important to have evidence,
I
but
suppose if we
that's
just
where
know
the thing.
about life on Earth, then we think it's rare, and then we hear about life in the solar system. The solar system could still be rare on the same logic that we thought Earth was before this. Um, are, are you? Do you enjoy talking about the Great Filter or not?
About which?
The Great Filter,
The great filter. And what do you mean by
as
the great filter?
well as a suggestion for the Fermi paradox in terms of why we potentially won't find any
Yeah,
intelligent
I
life.
think, I don't know. I talk a bit about the Fermi paradox in the book, as one has to, even though it's much discussed. I don't know that I brought anything new to it. But so here's my take on that, that I think, Fermi's point was, even flying at the slow speeds of chemical rockets, if you could fly to the nearest planet, populate it, develop an industry, launch new rockets from there on elsewhere in the galaxy, you wouldn't have an individual fill the galaxy, but you could have your species fill the galaxy in about 250,000 years was the estimate, which is about the time it takes the sun to rotate around the galaxy, just coincidentally. Uh, so it could be by that hypothesis that the the universe we see around us is just swarming with extraterrestrial life. And the point there is that we've got all sorts of sophisticated ways of looking for that. Uh, it's optical radiation, radio radiation, infrared radiation, ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, gamma rays, all sorts of ways we probe the universe these days, and there's not any sign of life out there at all. So it is not true that life has expanded to fill the galaxy, and extraterrestrial life is all about us. There's no hint of Klingon battleship exhausts, no matter where we look. And so I don't know what that means. That if maybe it means that the filter is that, yeah, we any intelligent society kills itself off in some way with nuclear weapons or fossil
Artificial
fuels,
intelligence.
whatever. But I guess I'm at that point I'm agnostic. I see the possibilities. The evidence says we don't see any now, so it's not just obviously abundant, and that's just kind of where we are.
Yeah, and the Great Filter suggests that if we don't see evidence of intelligent life, which we don't, it could be possible that there is a filter that all developing species cannot get through, which may mean they develop a technology and that technology will kill them, such as nuclear war
Yeah,
or climate change or
yeah,
potentially people say artificial
it's
intelligence.
possible.
So when you look at ourselves, you have to wonder, are we that side of the filter or this side of the filter? Have we got through the filter or is it still to come?
Yes, no, that's the question. I have nothing. I mean, you're absolutely stating the question properly. I don't have anything terribly new to say about that topic. One other thing that I will add to it is I do wonder, in terms of we look out there and we don't see any evidence for life. Um, Maybe we don't have the technology yet, and so my example of that is maybe. advanced technological species have learned to communicate with neutrinos, which are very penetrating and go everywhere. And we just don't have the technology to do that. Same as I can imagine an Aboriginal person in where the South Pacific somewhere uh, without a radio. So, we're talking to each other by radio all the time. And if you don't have that device and that technology and all that's just, sweeping past you in the world on a radio as you tune it is just full of life. But if you don't have that device, if you don't have that technology, then you don't know anything about it. And uh,
Yeah.
and it may be like that there are ways of communicating somehow. Again, it would kind of tend to be communicating faster than the speed of light. And there are some hints from physics that I discuss a little bit that conceptually maybe something like that is possible. But if it is, then it takes a very advanced civilization to develop that technology. Then we're just a swarm in life, but in our ignorance of it. So that's a possibility.
And enormous amounts of power as well.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, you may have to tap the whole power of your sun or maybe the whole power of a galaxy or something.
But I
There,
love,
there there are arguments against that as well. There was a very clever paper published in an astronomical journal about 10 years ago now, pointing out that even if you trap all the energy of your sun, so a Kardashev kind of civilization, you absorb that energy, you do stuff with it, but you have to thermalize some of it. You have to entropize some of it, and that energy will be re-radiated in the infrared. So longer wavelengths than the human eyeball has evolved to see. But we now have detectors of the infrared, and he went out and surveyed and looked for Kardashev-like civilizations radiating in the infrared, and he saw zero. So that's part of the negative evidence that it could be they're slightly dimmer than our technology or something, but the first order, it was a very clever thing to do. And the answer was no sign of such a thing, even if you're tapping the energy of your star, especially if you're tapping the energy of your star. Some of that has to leak into the infrared.
yeah, it's an interesting thought, isn't it? That not only would you have to be an advanced intelligent species who could harness the power of your sun, you would have to at first pass hide it completely as well from any other surrounding
Yeah, so
galaxies.
you'd have to get from where we
That's
are to that
twice as
stage.
big an ask, isn't it, really?
So, maybe we will do that a million years from now. Um, that's another topic of whether we will be we a million years from now. But
How long do you think that we will stay in our current biological form for, as we are now?
that's a good one. That's a good one. Uh, we're in a 14 billion year old universe. We're living on a 5 billion year old planet. Life somehow came to be. I talk about that a little bit. Nobody really knows how it came to be, and got more and more complex and developed the intellect we have now. But Homo sapiens, as you and I and the folks listening participate in that, are only a few 100,000 years old, 250, 350, 400,000 years old. A million years ago, there were no Homo sapiens on this planet. So looking forward, my guess, which I'm quite, I mean, it's a guess, but I'm very confident of it, there will be no Homo sapiens on this planet a million years from now. And that's partly based on just Darwinian evolution. Things are going to change. We'll adapt to climate change. We'll move into space. We'll develop different genetics that allow us to live in space, but that we will be a recognizably different species uh, in a million years if it's just biological evolution. But it's not going to be because we now know how to fiddle with our own evolution with techniques like CRISPR and all the genetic work that's going on and mapping the human genome and all that's just setting the stage for being able to tinker with our own biology. And a question of how fast we tinker with our own biology to ensure that we are no longer Homo sapiens, that could be as short as decades or as long as 100,000 years. I don't know, but I think it will happen, and we're going to have the technology, and somebody somewhere or many somebodies are going to use it, and we will start designing our own evolution. And I think that's just inevitable. These things have their own momentum, and that momentum is going in that direction, and I suspect it's probably unstoppable.
So a million years from now, we don't exist in this form anyway, as that projection
Yeah, so
goes.
maybe there will be creatures that are descendants still here, but not as Homo sapiens as we recognize ourselves now. The other aspect of that is, never mind, we can tinker with our own genes, but there are many people wondering whether we have to somehow merge with our machines, AI planted in our heads, or something to defend ourselves against AI becoming, artificial general intelligence and threatening to take over things. If we're going to do battle with them in some way, then we need to merge with them. Join
Yeah,
your
don't bring a knife to a gunfight, eh?
something like that. Yeah, yeah. Bring your own gun.
So the genetic changes would be essential if we look at a long enough time frame. For example, a few hundred years, 500 million years ago, then we couldn't have breathed very easily on the planet, so we'd have to have adjusted ourselves to have lived then, dinosaur times, and maybe in the future, all living on Mars, genetic modifications to the human body would be fairly essential, correct?
Yeah, I think so. But again, I think they will be artificially induced. I don't think we will
Yeah.
wait around to evolve. We're gonna engineer ourselves. It's my guess.
Yeah, I mean, evolution doesn't have a goal. Evolution moves at its own pace. I
Yes.
mean, the
Well said.
raptors existed for a long, long, long time on this planet. There's no evidence that they were evolving. They had a very long timeline to do so, and didn't seem to get any more intelligent or adapt. So there's nothing suggesting we'll change automatically.
Yeah.
Uh,
But we do have goals. Homo sapiens have goals, and they will apply them.
but just a thought about evolution is
Sure.
you can extrapolate, I guess, evolution to include technology, and we've taken an extreme of the Darwinian description of evolution, that we've adapted ourselves to the environment. Of course, we didn't stop there. Then we started adapting the environment to us. But that has not been successful, and we've meddled with it, as I think you mentioned earlier, to the point now where our environment is potentially going to destroy us. Is that still evolutionary, or is that anti-evolutionary?
Well, we have benefited from that. So, sorry, but you're being a little glib about that. I understand where you're going, but we have benefited from it. It's just if it runs to too much of an extreme, then it starts biting back at us, which is what we're kind of seeing now. Um,
But is anything of what I described traditionally scientifically evolution, or is it just
yeah, no,
human meddling?
yeah, I'm still, I'm debating in the back of my head here.
Mm.
Um, it's kind of a matter of definition, whether you restrict evolution to a biological thing, or you allow it to expand into the entire enterprise of what's going on. And I don't know. So it is kind of a matter of definition. But I think, at some level, we are going to merge with our technology, and whether it's becoming hyper conscious or something, I'm not sure, but
Right.
uh, that is part of the human condition, is to work with your technology and absorb it at some level. So I don't know. I guess I don't have a firm answer to that.
And you picture the world a million years from now where we have changed ourselves biologically, with CRISPR or whatever the new techniques are.
Whatever the
Potentially, we've
newer
we've
techniques are.
merged with machines to make us faster, smarter, stronger. But what's the rest of the world doing? What are snakes and chickens and buffaloes doing at this point?
Well, very smart chickens. Very smart chickens. No, I don't know whether they evolve along with us.
Well, it wasn't an evolution question. It's just
I,
if
I, I suspect
inhabitation.
those other species will continue to unless we decide to get involved, they are going to continue to evolve at a biological scale. I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years or something. And that will continue to happen. But I don't preclude humans saying, well, we figured out how to fiddle around with our own biology. Let's go after the chickens and the whales and the porpoises. Maybe we can, make the porpoises and whales smarter and we can talk to them and they can tell us, hold off, folks. You've gone too far or something.
I think the whales are already telling us that. I think the
I
problem is
think
just that we
I think
can't
maybe they are. I
can't
think maybe they
communicate.
are.
Whereas I think it is always tricky when you haven't got vocal cords and fingers and thumbs to express yourself quite the way that we do.
But we are so close. I mean, there's a little incidence of this, but we are so close to be able to use AI to translate the sounds that the whales and the porpoises make that I can't prove that, but I'm excited to think that we may soon come to our ability to listen to and understand what those creatures are saying. I've also read that, well, that may just allow us to perturb their lives even more than we do now. If we can, start to read their minds or something when it's not a two-way street. So you have to be careful about all these steps. But AI is the kind of thing that can assimilate complicated signals and make sense out of them. And that's the state of the art now. So I think it may be going in that direction.
We've already seen some remarkable progress on that. We've established that whales and dolphins each have names and that are called
Yes,
out by that
yes.
name. And it's not a
I
word. I
think
mean,
that's
it's more
very
like
cool.
a
And monkeys for
frequency.
that matter. So
Yeah, and I think they experimented once with some dolphins where they played the calls of a deceased dolphin to the dolphins who got very excited and gathered around the speaker. And I
yeah,
thought that was
yeah,
especially cruel, actually, that
it is very cool.
they led to believe that this dolphin was back.
Uh, but then again, the ethical side of that is, are you doing some moral or ethical damage to suggest to a bunch of porpoises that their dead friend is alive? Do you
I
really
think
want to
it's
do that?
very disrespectful
Well,
of their
yeah,
intelligence to.
maybe. Again, it's just something to
to
be thought about. There's just so many nuances to all of this as we make our way in the world.
yeah, and I think as a more than part-time vegetarian, I think, there's two aspects, isn't there? And being purposely cruel, there are lines that we cross for
Now,
sure.
I'm conflicted on that and sort of don't think about things I probably should in terms of eating meat and whatnot. So what about plants? Do you think plants are conscious?
Mm. Yeah, so I thought about that. So I used to call myself a vegan, and then I decided that I would eat some seafood, uh, and I'd go down the food chain to things like prawns and oysters and so on that are clearly conscious, but probably don't have the lives that other animals would have. And then you look at octopuses, who octopi are very intelligent, and you look at lobster, who live longer than we do in many
Yes,
cases.
yep,
So you
all
start
true.
to have a sort of species by species view. And then of course, everything's alive, everything's living, and plants experience consciousness and talk to other plants. And obviously, we don't understand pain. I think, we talk about dolphins having language and plants communicating. I mean, it truly is completely different, and the psychology is completely different. You cannot, anthropomorphize, human emotions and feelings, of course, to a plant. And so pain isn't pain. It's not like I feel pain here, so a plant would feel pain there. Of course not. But you've got to eat something. And so I think in the end, we just say, these are the things I eat and these are the things I don't eat. And trying to draw a line, especially some sort of superiority line over other humans, I think doesn't make sense.
And different people draw those lines in different places, and I think that's just the reality of life. Yes, we have to eat something. I, maybe we'll learn to grow our own food
Well,
out of
yeah, maybe
microbes and stuff, and you can pluck your hamburger off the wall and broil
yeah.
it, have a good time with it. So that, artificial food like that is clearly coming. That's going to be part of our environment in the future. I don't know quite when, but there's smart people working very hard to make that happen.
Then we have to assume that that lab grown meat doesn't have any consciousness.
Yeah, life's a risk, my friend.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it would
no,
have
no,
to
there's
be
it's
alive.
a complicated issue. I don't want to simplify it, but But that would be a way out of some of these moral ethical dilemmas that a lot of people feel. And so I think there
Yeah.
will be pressure to do that for that reason, if no other one.
Yeah, look, some people will grab a cockroach and put it in the soup and eat it, and other people wouldn't go, within 30 yards of it. Is perception's
Yes.
fascinating. So,
Yeah.
so your book that you wrote as an astrophysicist, you wrote it because you're concerned. Is that correct?
It was a and I am, and some of my concerns came out and became defined as I was trying to teach the class in the first place, and then write the book. But it came more so just from kind of intellectual curiosity. And I could tell you a small anecdote about that, of where it really got started. Uh, there's uh, uh, program put into place at the University of Texas at Austin where some professors will pick a book to read and announce that to the incoming freshman class, and then talk to those students who read that book and want to talk about it. So a small group, like 2,000 incoming freshmen, but you might talk to a dozen of them or something interested in that particular topic. And I guess a step beyond that, or before that, I can't remember where I read this now, but I was reading the words of a pastor, a religious man, and he said, I believe in Darwinian evolution. I believe that's how mankind came to exist on the planet. But it is clear to me that mankind, Homo sapiens as we know them now, is the ultimate. We're it. And I read that and I said, I've not thought deeply about this before, but I think I've just assumed since I first heard about evolution, what's it, grade school or high school or something like that, that we're catching us in a particular phase and we will continue to evolve. There was never any doubt in my mind about it. I didn't even ask the question, but here's this learned man making this statement that got me thinking about it. So one of the things I did in this book reading program was to assign the students to read Darwin. And we just talked about evolution. And I raised that question. Do you think Homo sapiens is the end all and be all, or are we still evolving? And the students were way ahead of me. They already, some of them had studied biology and they knew that things like CRISPR were coming along. I don't know whether we used the phrase at the time because I learned that a couple of years later. But they were already very much aware that we were coming to an era where we could affect our own biology. And as an astronomy professor, I was completely oblivious of this. And so that got me thinking. And then I ended up teaching a course on that to raise that issue, Darwin and where are we now and where are we going, and taught that for 5 years and then took those notes and turned them into the book. But it all goes back to that preacher saying that mankind isn't evolving anymore, that we're the peak.
But he has no choice but to say that because, of course, the Bible says that man is created in the image of God.
Yes, well, it gets complicated
You
there.
can't get better than God, can you? He gets a bit
I'm
stuck if
thinking
that's
about
an
it like a
option.
scientist, and I see how evolution works, and I, I just
Well,
I
I'm just a
think
pragmatist,
we're
and I
still
can see
evolving.
that God is created in the image of man.
Well,
Uh,
no comment.
but that preacher is anthropomorphizing evolution and suggesting that it has a goal of some kind or intentions. But we have
Yeah,
intentions, but evolution would definitely not have intentions.
I
So,
think that's true, and that is my founding assumption that evolution pokes and prods in every single direction it can, and the the things that can survive and thrive will win and procreate, and that's how evolution works. And no, it does not have a goal. It doesn't have a leader. It doesn't. It just.
it's like a force then, like gravity, like entropy, like
It's
what
just
is,
a
how would you
matter of
describe it?
things striving to procreate, and that's not a conscious will necessarily. It's just No, but I don't know quite how to think about that. That you can't attribute a conscious decision for a cell to split and become two cells. That's not a decision that cell makes. It somehow got wired into it, but then that
Mm.
gives the ability to have slightly different genetics, and then you can combine that into a more complicated thing, or more complicated beings themselves sort of come with them instinctually, the urge to create. It's like that our genes just use our bodies as a means to propagate the genes. That we're the accident. That the genes are down there saying, "I must propagate. I must make more of my own." And hey, being a cell in a human being is an effective way to do that. I'll try that, or a chicken, or a whale, or a corn cob, or whatever.
Yeah, we're into Dawkins territory
The,
now,
the
aren't we?
selfish gene hypothesis. So,
But it does strike me that you and I may not want to die, and I would suggest the primary reason is the human ability to project a future, and we would think about all the happy times that we would have in the future, and all the pain that our friends and relatives would suffer from our loss, and that would cause us great distress, and and that would be consciously a great reason for us to want to stay alive. But you take a cat or a rabbit, it absolutely wants to stay alive. There's no question about that, but it's
yeah.
unlikely to be reflecting on the loss of its friends. So is that hardwiring's in us as well, isn't it? We're just projecting on top of that, I guess, aren't we?
Somehow that is hardwired in that you fight to stay alive. Um, from the gene's point of view, it's well, I don't want my host body to die before my host body has a chance to reproduce, however it does, splitting cells or by sexual reproduction or whatever.
Mm.
I want you to stay alive long enough to reproduce because I want my genes to propagate. And again, that's not a conscious decision, but it's a framework to think about it. And then that gets really, over billions of years of the evolution of life, that gets really hardwired into the genetic structure itself, apparently. And so yeah, we all strive to stay alive. And it's for the reasons you said. I would add to that, now that I've had a chance to think about some of these things, I'm really curious to know what happens in the future. And if I die, I won't know. And that's kind of frustrating. So there's lots of reasons to try to stay alive.
Do you think you will stay alive in some form?
Oh, well, now that's a tricky one too. So one of the other things that is going on right now in technology is the drive to extend humans' health spans at the very least, to stay healthy up to the point you drop off, or even extend ages. There are people like Ray Kurzweil who say, I want to live enough to live forever, that I live enough that the technology of biology gets good enough that I can repair myself and stay young and live forever. And that's a very strong effort, both technologically and sort of spiritually and whatnot. Not sure exactly how widespread it is, but it's a very strong trend among people who are thinking those thoughts. And I completely understand that. I'm not sure whether I want to live forever, but now I've written this book, I'd like to participate in some of that just to see how it goes.
Would you be happy just to
There are
experience?
attendant issues if we really are going to extend human lifetimes, for instance, in an appreciable way. Then there's some ancillary issues that we need to think through, because death is a major part of our culture right now, because we're used to people dying. This is just the way it works. You're born, you live a good life, you die, uh, leaving behind sadness and disappointment and whatnot, as you were saying. But if we all start living forever, now you're back to this question of how many people can the earth provide? If everybody who's born lives forever, where do we put them all? And I've got a slightly facetious way of defining the issue. If if we attain that technology where you can live forever, what do we do with the babies? If all the old folks don't go away? So it's part of the natural thing now where you age out of the system and fresh new people can come in and propagate the species and
Yeah.
develop new technology, all that exciting stuff. That,
And
that would just change drastically if nobody dies. And so
that's part of balancing that we talked about before, isn't it? That new ideas are able to come through and the status quo can be broken. And we do get change where change is needed. If nothing else, a dictator cannot live forever. We know that for certain. They will eventually disappear.
well, people are striving to live forever. So how do you plug that into your thinking?
Um, and do you think, let's say, Ray Kurzweil was one of the first people who could live on in some form of consciousness or replicable
Well,
consciousness?
then there's also, yeah, downloading your brain into a machine of some kind and living there. Uh, I don't know quite what that would be like, but the fact that the technology is leading in a direction where we might be able to do that is certainly true. And then what it would be like to kind of wake up and find that you're not in your young, healthy body, you're in some kind of a box in I don't know, Microsoft data processing center or something.
And if that was the case, would you be content just to experience the world? Or would you personally be more interested in still contributing to the world?
Oh boy. Well, between the two, I would have to put experiencing the world first. That's kind of what we're wired to do. If one could make a contribution, that's even better. I don't want to, you know, oversell my contribution to the world, but I've certainly enjoyed experiencing it and would like to continue doing that for a while.
That's but
It would just be very different if you were in a, silicon chip somewhere rather than in this corporeal body. Good, bad, indifferent. I don't know. Very different. Would be different.
it we'll touch on regulation, I'm sure, in our conversation, but this is a huge one in terms of rights and regulations because that then we start after arguing, well, okay, not only are you carrying on in some form of aliveness, but what about your estate? What about your money? Are you able to hold
Yeah.
on to that?
Yeah. Your kids want it and you're still alive.
Are you able to
Yeah. No,
carry
no,
on?
there are just lots of complicated issues that come with the issue of people living a long time or forever in particular, to go to the extreme case.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly worrying to think about a dictator who could be positioned
Yeah,
forever,
but then,
whatever that
then,
means.
then do you turn that around and take what you and I are talking about just now and say that you and I are wishing for death? That's not exactly what I mean. It's just that if people live forever, there's going to be issues that have to be thought about.
Well,
And I don't know how you handle them, but you don't handle them by ignoring them. And my impression is that most of the live forever people are not thinking through what the implications are. So,
and that elements of life and the stages of life, the entropy of life, obviously shapes our lives. I'm 42 and I'm fit, so I look and think I want to make the most of this decade. I want to get to 50 and really have used that energy wisely because I might have different energy at 50, and I
there
certainly
you
will
go.
at 70 and then 90.
There you
But that's fine. That's part of being alive. I do wonder if we had this idea that you could live forever and that Romeo and Juliet and so on, or parents or whatever, that the experience of loss could be really, really difficult if you were losing somebody who, in theory, could have lived with you forever.
Yep. Uh, Absolutely. I have no more to say about that particularly, but you're right. Yes, it would be. So the only way you could die is by stepping in front of an automated vehicle or something. I mean,
Mm.
uh, yeah. I mean, if you're going to live forever and then you have an accident, that would be sort of a heightened tragedy at some level. But
Somehow, yes.
I don't know. I'm just laying in my own limited way. I'm laying some of these issues on the table to be thought about. I don't really know what the answer is. I mean, the answer is certainly not let's stop doing research on life extension. That's not the answer. The answer, go ahead and do your research, but let's think about the implications and what we might have to do to accommodate it if you're successful.
Yeah, and I think, we've been doing it anyway. I know there's some misunderstandings about the length of life because, with infant mortality in the past, the average was much lower, than it actually was. It perceived to be much lower than it was. But we have still added 20, 30 years, probably, haven't
Oh
we?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, sure. People, a few hundred years ago would tend to be dead at your age. Never mind mine. So this is good. I've had another 40 years on top of you, and I've enjoyed pretty much every one of them, and I'd like to keep it going. Uh,
Yeah, and we're grateful for modern medicine. I think almost all my family members will be dead right now, but for
and
modern
you
medicine.
you get to be 115. Don't you want to go to 125 and
Yeah, I do. And I
125
want to be
go to
quite fit as
150?
well. So I need a health span and the lifespan.
Yeah, so partly, I guess the suggestion here is either by force or just the evolution of things, we may have to think about death in a very different way if we can develop the technology to live forever. And I don't know exactly what that means. Changing our psychology about it in some way.
The book, you mentioned Ray Kurzweil, and your book is titled with the singularity in it. Is that
That's right.
just choosing a title amongst all the different topics in there, or was AI quite prevalent and front of mind for you as you wrote it? And do you want to say what you mean by the singularity, just in case people
Sure.
aren't
Yeah.
familiar?
So the singularity is a term that goes back to the engineer and author Werner Vinge, who used it in a science fiction novel. And it comes from other kinds. It's a mathematical term of basically dividing by zero, so everything goes to infinity. That's what a true mathematical singularity is. There are singularities in the middle of black holes, as Roger Penrose, your famous scientist, showed and proved. And then it was metaphorically picked up in this other context. And I'm not sure that Ray Kurzweil invented it. No, I'm sorry. So it was Vinge who invented it in this novelistic concept, I think, and then Kurzweil picked it up and made it particularly famous. But the idea is we get to a stage of our technology where our machines, so artificial intelligence, whatever manifestation that is more competent in every aspect of human activity. And so then we're kind of tied, but at that point, the artificial intelligence is going to race ahead basically at the speed of light or the speed of moving electrons around in a silicon chip or something. And we're still advancing at the speed of biology, which takes tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years to change. And so if we get to that point of equality, the artificial life is going to take over. And who knows what happens? That's part of what we're thinking about and talking about. But that's what is meant by the singularity in this context, is the time when machines get as competent as we are and then race ahead.
Okay. And just revisiting that question then, was that the main purpose of putting this book together, or is it just a means of referencing the types of content that you've included?
Well, by the time I'd picked up this idea and did the first little group discussion with the students, then had the idea of teaching it as a course. And I used Kurzweil's, what was it, 2005 book, The Singularity is Near. I used that as a textbook because it's full of clever ideas. It illustrates the basic points very, very clearly, has some very interesting extrapolation, a fascinating book. And so we use that. And so I wasn't thinking of writing a book at the time. I'm just teaching a class. And it was uh, great fun because you learn new things and the students were very interactive. It was a fairly small class. Uh, but as I taught that class, I realized there were things that Kurzweil didn't address, like what are the implications of some of this? What are the implications for capitalism? He doesn't talk about. They said, well, maybe you can get rich in the future if you invest in technology, but otherwise, he didn't talk about that. He didn't really talk about how all this might affect democracy. And so I ended up with an urge to address those things. And we talked about it a bit in my class. And it was sort of putting all of that together, ideas that had come up during the class, uh, these notions that Kurzweil didn't address absolutely everything, um, that, well, maybe there's a book in there. So that's how it came back. It was a slightly messy process rather than saying, I want to write about AI. It's just clear that AI had to play a role in it. But so I don't quite know when CRISPR-Cas9 was invented. I, in principle, could remember. I write about it a bit in the book. Um, but I didn't hear about it until like 2013 or 14 after I started teaching the class. And it just came on me like a bombshell that this is what my undergraduate students in that book discussion were talking about, that we can change our own evolution with these techniques. And I took that as sort of a prime example of how technology advances exponentially, and something you didn't know about yesterday all of a sudden has become this overwhelming thing the next day. And CRISPR is just one of many things one could cite in that regard. And so I wanted to write about the genetics too, because I talked about genetics with a friend of mine. I had dabbled in astrobiology for a while and earlier in my career. So some of those thoughts were in my mind and they all just kind of assembled as I started thinking about the book. And space travel and other things. And there, as an astronomer, I'm thinking about that anyway. So it was just the book was a way to dump a bunch of things in there. And I was surprised myself as I went along writing things and realizing that, oh, I've been thinking about that topic for 20 or 30 years. And here's what I think about it, and put it in the book. That wasn't part of my thinking when I started writing it, but just things I realized I'd pondered for a long time, informally, non-expertly, but as an interested human being, not as an expert in it necessarily.
Yes. We talked about climate change briefly earlier on, and we touched on evolution. I'll just try a comparison here and see if it works, because we've experimented with our climate, if you like, and now we could be wiped out by climate change. But there's no intention from our climate to harm us. And we've experimented with coding and data and statistical models to the point of which we have something we've coined artificial intelligence, and there's some suggestions that artificial intelligence could wipe us out. But is the next sentence relevant as well? But like the climate, there is no intention there. It's just something that we've meddled with it and it could do us harm. Or are we going further than that in this conversation, that actually there's a will, an intention, a consciousness, decisions that are made by a completely separate entity of intelligence? Because that's a leap from my perspective. But can you take me there from your perspective?
Yeah, I think a little bit more of the former. I don't think there's necessarily any intention to it. um, in quite the way you're asking. So I guess the way I characterize it is there are smart people in research labs, in businesses that that see a cool thing they can do, and so they work on that cool thing. And as some of this in artificial intelligence was starting off, I think the history is, as I read it, is pretty clear that people weren't thinking about implications the way they've come to pass. They were just doing something cool in the lab for the intellectual excitement of it. And that then feeds on this stuff. You learn something new and then you can build on that, and off it takes. And on the commercial side, there are people who can make a profit on it. And so they work on that because they can make a profit, and that's the way our capitalistic system works. And I'm all in favor of that until it, runs off the end of the track a bit. But I don't think anybody, it wasn't a global intention in any way. It's just people doing cool stuff. And that will lead to developments that can, in some circumstances, run away. So we need to be careful about them. But I don't, maybe I'm not quite interpreting what you mean by an intention, but I don't see intention that way, which is also why I think it's unstoppable. You're not going to stop people from doing cool stuff in the lab, and it's going to build. And so here we are. All of a sudden, ChatGPT drops on us out of nowhere, but it wasn't nowhere. I mean, there was this gradual building of that technology over decades.
Yes. For sure, I think it's almost like an emergent property, isn't it, from our consciousness that these ideas will
Uh,
arise.
yeah, and that's a fascinating topic that I also talk about a bit because it may have to do with the origin of life, and it may be where AI is going. But emergent properties is a very important principle in what's going on, and so the question of whether consciousness in machines will be a natural emergent property in machines, the way consciousness is apparently an emergent property in life, us in particular. Fascinating question. I don't exactly know the answer, but it's a lot of fun to think about.
And maybe I get confused when I listen to people like Nick Bostrom, who was speaking to the podcast host Sam Harris recently.
Ah,
Uh,
yeah. Mhm.
they on that show they made it very clear that if you weren't appropriately concerned about artificial intelligence as an existential threat, then you were foolish. Was sort of the message I was getting, that you just sort of didn't get it. You were in denial, or you weren't clever enough to figure it out somehow. They were quite direct with that.
Yeah.
And so,
I,
but they didn't also give me a path to what they were suggesting was going to happen, or even actually define clearly enough what they're talking about. Because I'm told that there could be an AI in the future that treats humans now the way that we treat dogs. Sometimes we look after them, sometimes we kill them, and the dog doesn't know what's going on.
yeah.
And that to me is purely science fiction. And if we can't even understand our own consciousness to suggest that we're going to create it in a sort of Frankenstein's monster style in a machine, I mean, anything's possible, but that is no more or less likely for me than aliens landing tomorrow and saying, hello, we're a superior species.
Interesting.
For
So I
me.
disagree. I disagree with you there. I think, again, going back to the aliens, we look around, we see no evidence of aliens anywhere. So I think it's very unlikely aliens are going to land tomorrow. Uh, I'm not maybe completely hard over on Bostrom's uh, view there, but I do think if you think about it a bit, that there could be bad circumstances in the future with this technology. And therefore, I think it's really important that we collectively, everybody, think about it, have discussions like you and I are having right now. People could agree with us, disagree with us, but I think it's important to have the discussions, to raise the issues, to be aware that there could be some kind of machine apocalypse in the future, and what do we do to prevent that? And the solution is not obvious. It's a combination of trying to identify which directions are healthy, which directions are unhealthy, put regulations into place to try to limit that, and all that's going on right now. And it's much more in the public discussion now than it was when I started teaching this class 10 years ago. So I think that's a very healthy thing. The other thing I argue about in the book, which is very basic and it doesn't really tell you how to address this Harris Bostrom notion, is just to be aware, because it's very easy to go about your daily life and you're worried about having a job, feeding your kids, whatever all these are, which dominate most of us. But to be aware that these technological things are happening ever more rapidly and they are encroaching on us and they can have negative effects. And I think the more that just general people are aware of that. So awareness is one of the things that I try to emphasize in the book. And, if you want to be to kind of learn how to be aware of these things that are going on, then one thing you can do is read the book, because that's a theme that I stress all the way through it. And I'm still trying when I learn new things. This is something I started in the class. I would ask the class to bring examples of new technology to class, and we would talk about a bit, and then go ahead and talk about the theme of the day. And I've continued that. So I've been posting on X and LinkedIn and whatnot, just little tidbits of how technology is advancing to try to bring that awareness. And it's like, you know, other examples of things, a particular kind of automobile. If you don't think about Bentleys a lot in your day-to-day life, you may or may not see one driving by, but if you start thinking Bentley, then you'll start noticing Bentleys more often because you're now just kind of aware of it. And I think this
I think you live in a nicer neighborhood than
technological,
me, Craig.
I could have picked, I was trying to think of another brand of British car. That's not the
It's been
greatest
a while
example.
since there was a British car, unfortunately.
Well, you're
But
right. So that too. So I'm sure there's a better example. Uh,
yeah, we
but
aware
but
of what we notice.
Yeah, but once you start becoming aware, you will notice more. That's just part of the human psychology. And so my urging and my quest at some level is to encourage people to be aware of these issues and see how fast things are coming and realize, oh, this is part of a big pattern here. This is not just a little isolated thing. And so
Uh,
awareness of these changes is an important mission that I now have with the book and these other little postings that I don't do as frequently as I should.
yeah, yes. Just for my clarity, and there may not be a yes or no answer to this, but everything that you're describing in terms of that the level of concern that we should have, is that related to a machine having consciousness or not?
Well, it is, but it's not the only thing. So one of the other things that I have tried to emphasize in the book is there is a human tendency to focus on one thing of concern. I mean, you got so many concerns, but focus on one thing of concern and not quite realize other things are going along as well. So my example of that is, for instance, climate change. Lots and lots of people are concerned about climate change. No question. And that's a healthy thing, I think. Lots and lots of people are thinking about AI and what direction is it taking us. And I think that's a healthy thing. There are people worried about, are we going to have an age of designer babies now that we can tinker with our own evolution? And another one I will throw into the mix that I thought I kind of invented in writing the book, and then I realized other people are writing about this, is issues of mind reading and mental telepathy. And my point in that context is if you just focus on climate change or you just focus on AI, you just focus on the genetics, you're missing the story because all of these things, it everywhere all at once, whatever that movie title was, they're all going to be advancing so fast we can barely, if we can, adjust to them. All four of those topics in the next 10 or 20 years. So if you just focus on one, that's maybe better than nothing, but I think it's important to realize there's a whole sweep of things going on that are going to be overwhelming us.
Yeah, and I take a passing interest, well, more than passing interest in everything you've just described, but I take a strong interest in AI, both personally and professionally. Um,
Well,
it's
then think a little more about genetics, my friend. Well, so what do you think about mental telepathy?
uh,
Okay, well,
I
let me
think
tell
I
you what
think about Neuralink quite a
let
bit.
me
That would
tell
be
you what to think about mental telepathy. We are clearly advancing to a stage where we can, with some accuracy, record what's going on in human brains. So you can, there's experiments where people were watching a video and the experimentalists, with the use of AI, this is definitely an AI catalyzed thing,
Mm.
can interpret those signals and recognize what the video was the person was looking at. That's a pretty amazing thing. I mean, it's not accurate, detailed mind reading, but it's definitely mind reading. That technology is with us. Elon Musk has got this Neuralink process where we put needles in your brain and measure, what individual neural firings are doing, and that's gotten to be a pretty sophisticated science. It's got a ways to go, but things that have happened just in the last couple of years have been quite dramatic. And then you can use those signals among other things. So that's mind reading at some level, it definitely is. You can use those signals to control a prosthetic. If an arm of somebody who's been damaged and now they have a robot arm they can control just by thinking. Um, you can in principle control a robot, a cobot, where you link to the robot, and the robot could be in the lab next to you, or it could be on the moon, and you could tell it what to do just by thinking. And this is more rudimentary, but people are developing techniques where they can implant ideas in your brain. So they know what the readout is. They reverse engineer that and put that feedback in. Some work done at MIT of sort of implanting dreamlike states and then putting ideas into people's heads. And that's another step in that direction. And if you put all that together, it means the technology could be coming. And I think because it's cool technology, people are going to keep working on it. It's not something you can just stop. Where you can read minds and write to minds, and that's basically mental telepathy and things we've thought about for a long time. But with AI and our machines, we can now do that. And then the question is, what do you do about that? Who owns that data? State of Colorado, state of California just passed rules that say anything you measure out of somebody's head is part of their private data, and you need to be very careful about how you do that. And I think that's an exceedingly healthy thing to do, because otherwise, I mean, the very fact that there were high-tech companies that fought those rules in California means those high-tech companies know perfectly well that is valuable data that they can make a buck off of. And I don't begrudge them making a buck, but you then got to put some restrictions in there of how they do that. We've seen that with all the previous 20 years of companies sucking up data and doing stuff with it. And some of it's been very healthy and some of it's been not so healthy, misinformation and disinformation and all of that. Anyway, I think mind reading, I I don't want you reading my mind. If I want you to know what I'm thinking, I'm happy to talk to you about it. And I don't want to read your mind. I don't really want to know what you're thinking. You express your thoughts. So there's just gigantic privacy issues if we get into this AI-induced mental telepathy stage, which I think is
Yeah, Greg, I'm a man. Everyone knows what I'm thinking about.
well, I can take a guess, but I won't. I write about it in the book. I won't tell you what it is.
Only for 90% of the day. But I mean, fascinating topics. And I do know a lot about data collection, as you might expect. And yeah, they do recognize these technology companies, the power of these devices. So Fitbit, for example, when Google acquired it, Google were banned from using
Yep,
Fitbit
yep.
data
All that medical
for 10
data.
years. And then in a number of years from now, they will be able to use that. And just putting on Oculus Quest headset, the company that owns that data, which in this case is Meta, they can tell a lot of health information about you from both wearing it and then the continuous wearing of it and trends over time. You can really understand somebody's health quite clearly from the movement
That
in their
that
eyes
in
and so on.
principle is a very good thing for expert doctors and whatnot to know exactly what your health is, but you
Yeah,
can
I
imagine
mean,
ways that it can get violated and corrupted and
yeah, I mean, some would argue that
the
Steve Jobs
regulations.
is
Yeah,
is dead because he didn't take his health seriously. He didn't get the checkups he needed. He didn't go to the doctor enough. He ignored things.
yeah.
And yeah, so AI is wonderful potentially. I mean, for early detection of disease, my
Absolutely,
goodness.
absolutely. I don't want to sound like a AI negativist. Lots and lots of good things AI can do, but
Yeah,
there are avenues that are not so healthy, and we need to
yeah.
be
I mean, and
eh,
I
where the awareness comes in. Oh yeah, let's sort those out. What's good and what's not good, and let's put some limits on the not good stuff.
and I see this dichotomy of dichotomy of both being amazed by AI and what it can do, but also working in the industry as well. One's clearly aware that it's not magic, and there is quite a lot of, particularly if we take something like ChatGPT, there's quite a lot of Wizard of Oz perspective going on. That when you do peer behind the curtain, For example, Amazon Go stores were supposed to be fully autonomous and run by AI, and then they admitted that they had several thousand people in India watching the cameras and working it. Apparently, self-driving cars are being driven 70% of the time remotely by people at other locations because they can't drive most of the time.
Sure. Well, but then check back with me in 10 years and see where that technology stands. So you're right. There's a lot of it is still rudimentary now, but you can see what direction it's going.
But I
Not,
share your concerns just by what we've said as well, that we are exponentially humans more complex than these technologies are. These technologies are incredibly primitive, I promise, compared to us and compared to the future. And imprinting emotions into a human brain when we don't even understand the human brain is both dangerous and quite weird, really.
it is weird, but I'm telling you, there are rudimentary steps in that direction. And they're not going to stop because it's really cool science.
Yeah. But it
So,
strikes me that people,
1 year, 10 years, 100 years, I don't know. I'm pretty convinced that's the direction things are going.
my
And
concern is that people
what's
do
the limit?
understand that AI is a huge risk. They understand the wrong risks for me. They
I'm
have
sorry.
this, they understand risk in terms of
Ah,
the Terminator and the sci-fi type risks quite clearly, and they talk to me about those a lot. Sort of just regular
well,
people.
so there are some concerns in that direction. I talk a little bit about uh, yeah, killer autonomous killing weapons, and right now those are sort of regulated, and I think that's a healthy way to be. But but it's not just that. They're more. I mean, nobody knew when the internet was invented that we'd end up in an era of virulent misinformation and disinformation. Nobody saw that coming. And yet it just emerged naturally out of FaceTime and all those other things. So it's trying to be foresighted about those kinds of unexpected consequences that I'm urging people to think about.
And I think we're fighting the same cause there, but there's lots and lots of issues, of course, that need lots of attention. One I wrote recently about was universal basic income, and if we see mass
Mhm.
job displacement, we might find that companies like OpenAI, which is backed by Microsoft, starts paying these universal basic incomes. Now, I'm not sure whether they would intend, they have trialed this, of course, it's not just speculation, whether they would intend to pay these to people who have been displaced in their jobs in Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, or whether it would just be universal basic income from Americans by Americans. Um, the every single tech company of any scale outside of China is, of course, American. There's none in Europe to speak of, so that's interesting. But if that was the case, and we had a future where Sam Altman's OpenAI was effectively providing the living of 10 million Americans, and then
Yeah.
OpenAI suffered some financial distress, it would be unlikely that the government would let OpenAI fail because it supports so many people's lives.
Mhm.
And that would be very
Well,
concerning for competition.
to me, your train of thought there is exactly the kind of thing I'm trying to encourage. You start with that extrapolation and then see where it goes.
Mm.
And whether it will go in exactly that direction, I don't know, but that absolutely is one of the possibilities. And we need to think about that and think of, what do we do? And part of that then is, and your awareness is, intelligent regulations. We don't want to shut open AI down now, but we don't want one man, Sam Altman, end up being responsible for the economics of the whole world because he controls the UBI. So, how do you get a grip on that? And it depends partly on regulations that I've said, but then the regulations are going to be made by the people you elect to do that kind of thing. So it comes back to voting at some level. It's important to be aware of these issues and then vote for people you think can handle them. And in the current election we're having here right now, I have some glimmer of what one of the candidates, what direction they would do, and no glimmer at all of what the other candidate would do in regard to these technologies that are coming at us. Just not discussed as far as I can tell. Now I could say a little bit more, but I don't want to go into politics too much. But I mean, it is important to try to vote for people that you think can intelligently and address these problems.
They are big, big thoughts to have for sure, and that's a big ask of our politicians who tend to be stuck on the day to day.
It's putting a lot on their shoulders, but if they don't want to shoulder that burden, they shouldn't be running for office.
What does a utopic future look like for us?
I'm sorry?
What does a utopic future look like for us?
So I'm not getting the word utopic.
Utopian.
Oh, utopia. Um, well, I guess I'm a more middle-minded person. I doubt it's going to be a complete dystopia or utopia. So I don't quite think in that regard. But yeah, you would sort of aspire to a situation where, for instance, everybody on the planet lives at the comfortable level of life that you and I do. And we're a long way from that right now. And so that is partly a question of redistribution of resources in a fair way. You don't want to strangle the capitalistic advance, which leads to so much of this. Again, I'm not anti-capitalist at all, but there need to be some rules. I mean, I think of it in terms of sort of American football, but it could be, you know, real football in general. You mean, you have a field of a certain size, and you've got regulations of when you're offsides kicking the ball down the field, and the game would be completely different. It was just okay. You have an arbitrary number of guys here and an arbitrary number of guys there. Go do something. You know, kick the ball into the goal. The whole structure of soccer is to have formal rules they have to play by and then do it superbly well. That's why it's such an exciting game throughout the world. Um, so this is a global enterprise. It's not just about the United States by any means, even though we do tend to control a lot of the big companies for sure. I'm sorry, I drifted off topic there a little bit.
No, I know. I see where you were going. And I think, first of all, it's a great answer that if we do consider ourselves to have a utopian life, you and I, in terms of the freedom and the health and the food and the good air and families and
Yes,
comforts.
it could probably be a lot better. But first of all, we spread it to everybody, and then you can look to see whether more fresh air or more parks and less this, that, and the other. But yeah, you and I live a pretty good life, and that I aspire to spread that around.
Yeah, I mean, my
And then is
life.
that utopia? Well, I don't know. I mean, is it utopia if nobody has to have a job for whatever reason? And I'm not
Mm,
sure. I've enjoyed my job being an astronomer.
I'm
Um,
quite keen never to have a job
I
again.
get bored easily, and it's been intellectually and otherwise very stimulating to do what I do. So and it provided me an income to have a fairly comfortable living as well. But if somebody just paid me an ample amount every year, so I didn't have to have a job, I mean, I don't quite know how I as an individual would react to that or how society would react to that. But that is a possibility that needs to be thought about. The
Yeah.
UBI, things like that has to be thought about.
No, I'm with you, and it might be that you and I would have a wonderful life under UBI, enjoying reading and studying and lecturing and whatever else that we might find our time to, and others would be in a state of suffering, losing the meaning of their life and the purpose, the routine that gives them immense happiness or whatever form that
I,
might
I did
take.
I did ask my students that question at one point in the class of what there were a UBI and you got a decent amount of money that you could live on, what would you do? And it was a very gender specific thing. Basically, all the guys in the class said I'd play Fortnite all day, all the time. This was more than 10 years ago when Fortnite was a rage, but uh,
Yes, I remember.
whether that would really be true or not, I don't know. But
I've never
what
had the pleasure, but
what I don't remember what the women said. I think they were more thoughtful about it.
I mean, my life is wonderful, but it would be even more wonderful if, say, Russia wasn't invading countries right now, and if there wasn't so much doom and gloom about climate change. And if you read the reports about climate change, I mean, it is a tough read. I mean, that is a
Oh,
bad
it is.
day if you spend
No,
your day reading that. That is
yeah.
not fun. Obviously, health span and lifespan are always things that could be brighter. But for me, I guess, I quite enjoy the activities of the day, like washing up and making food and things like that. I find them quite
Mhm. There you go.
purposeful. Um,
Good.
but but I think that the greatest joy is turning your talent into some sort of tangible meaning in your life. And a lot of people, unfortunately, have great lives but never really are able to use their talents. And that excites me about artificial intelligence. Does it allow more people to um, to find their greatness in the world? And
I don't know exactly how that will come. I mean, that's a lovely thought. I don't quite know how you would use AI to manifest that, but that's a wonderful goal, is to make everybody more self-satisfied and productive, if that's what it takes. And yeah, I mean, that's how I want to live my life. I understand maybe not everybody does, but
well, AI makes me happier because I can do more projects that we find very meaningful. We're able to do more with AI because it allows us to be more productive. I'm able to have less staff, and I find it very stressful to manage people. So I'm able to substitute some of what they do now by being supported by AI. Um, I guess it could just be as simple as developing something with AI that then gives you that income. I mean, you think about e-commerce and so on, and we've gone from having to lease a physical store to having a digital store to having a digital store where everything is planned and written for you with AI. These are great leaps forward.
as a writer, I don't look forward. I don't want AI writing for me. Thank you. It's just something I enjoy doing. It brings me pleasure to write, move words around, and rearrange things. And yes, I could then feed that to ChatGPT and see whether it would change it or even improve it. But I'm very jealous of my prerogative to arrange my own words in my own way. So
I'm with you
a
100%.
subjective thing. Not everybody's going to think about it that way, of course. But
I
you know, you
I
use AI
guess
to help write my email. Well, damn, I spend 10 minutes writing a 4 sentence email because I want to make sure it's saying what I want it to say. I don't know. So I do not use Chat GPT heavily right now in my own life, just to express that inconsistency.
I think some writing is utilitarian. We work with teachers, and a lot of the time they have to just produce things that need to be
Yes,
shared
no,
out,
I
and
understand.
that's
I understand. I'm
just
talking about
work.
my.
It just happens to be work that involves words. And when I talked about an online store, for example, um, are you okay for time?
Yeah,
Okay. Um, I did do this. I did
you
develop
saw I
a
was looking at the clock, didn't you? You're a smart young man. Yeah, yeah, no, I'm fine.
um, so I developed an online store in the background while I was working in a corporate job, and it sold matcha green tea through Shopify. But it was very challenging for me to know what to write, to how to describe this tea so that it
Mhm.
would sell. That's a very challenging thing. So I wrote these things all myself, and I realized I started talking to my customers. 'Cause I did okay. I got quite a few customers who came and bought the tea, and they were just amazing people. And they're writing me emails and giving me philosophical thoughts. And I thought, what an
Yeah,
amazing group of people. And
yeah,
eventually the penny dropped. And I say this without any ego, but the penny dropped. The way I'd written the website was appealing to a certain type of person.
uh-huh. Well, there
Um,
you go.
a person like me, I guess, it must be in the essence because I wrote it. And so I would never have got that experience if I'd used ChatGPT to write a utilitarian post about this is matcha tea from this place in the world and it does this for you. It wouldn't have attracted the kind of people who brought joy into my life at that point.
Well, that's a wonderful insight. You don't know. I mean, this is human interaction is a very complex, nuanced thing. So yeah.
But then Shopify says to me, what color do you want the add to cart button to be? And I laugh and think, the best color, whatever converts the most. Obviously, why would I care? Make it polka dot if you want. And I have no idea what the correct color is. But of course, Shopify does know
Well,
the correct color. It's got
some
millions
people
of
are going
colors.
to be very taken with the idea of getting the right color,
Yeah, there is clearly a color on this website that would make some difference to the sales, even if it's tiny, and so on and so forth. And so I think on a Shopify store like that, you've got some elements where absolutely your creative writing is the competitive advantage. In other cases, you just need to be able to call on the data and say, look, just put this in the right place on the screen and choose the order of these photos. I don't know. Should I show the person drinking the matcha first or should I show the
Mhm.
packet first? I don't know. I'll never know. but data
But
knows.
people are expert at that.
Yeah, and they can tell me with the data. So I think if it helps people to be more successful like that and on, you know, activities like that, then it does free up more time potentially that they're not spending the whole day tweaking a website. It's working much better for them and frees up their time to, to find more joyful endeavors.
The truth is, I do have something else coming up in a bit I need to prepare for. So this has been such great fun. I just,
Well, thank you
wonderful
for
conversation.
letting me share a few
But I
thoughts as
should
well.
be a little practical about it.
Well, that's absolutely fine. I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We covered a lot of ground.
Whilst I'll edit out our last exchange there, I will come back in here and say, Craig, it's been truly, truly wonderful to speak with you in this
I
past
really
time.
enjoyed it. I really appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate the way it came out. It's a very fun conversation. I mean, I appreciate you thought about all this already so much. It's you're one of the people I don't need to necessarily speak to.
And the choir that
There's
you're
people
preaching to,
out
Craig.
there that can benefit.
Wonderful.